Welcome to Unabridged Bookstore's virtual event space. We're so excited that you've chosen to spend your night with us to celebrate the release of This Thing Between Us, a mesmerizing horror thriller in which a widower battles his grief, rage, and the mysterious evil inhabiting his home smart speaker, which I think is the perfect way to kick off spooky season, because every time I battle my home smart speaker, I'm convinced there's a demon living inside of it too. So thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the release of this book. We are thrilled to have with us author Gus Moreno. He's the author of This Thing Between Us and has had work appear in a number of publications, including Aurelius, Pseudopod, Bluestem magazine, and the Burnt Tongues anthology. He lived in the suburbs of Chicago, but we've been instructed to make sure everyone knows that he is from Chicago and not to think otherwise, not even for a second. We're grateful to have him here. We always love supporting our local guys with their debut books, so thanks for joining. To help him with this conversation tonight is Rachel Evmalton, who earned her BA from Antioch College and her MFA from Emerson College. She's also had work appear in a number of different publications, and her debut novel, Tinfoil Butterfly, was longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and nominated for both a Shirley Jackson Award and a Bram Stoker. And tonight she's joining us from Albuquerque, so we're very grateful that they are both here with us to celebrate this book. Thanks, Gus, for writing it. Thanks, Rachel, for hosting this conversation. To all of you that are joining us in the audience, if you find yourself with any technical difficulties for this Zoom webinar, or if you have any questions about Unabridged Bookstore, any of the events and things that we do here, you can hit a quick reply to that email invite that you were sent, and I'll be on hand to help you the best that I can. Once we get started, if you have some questions for either Gus or Rachel here, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A button. You can click on that and it'll open up a little chat window for you to drop your questions in there. And if we have time after we've heard from the two of them, we'll get through some of those questions. So for now, thank you all for joining us. Help me welcome Gus, who's going to start with the reading for us.
Hey everyone, I'm Gus Moreno. I have a little reading here for you from my book, This Thing Between Us. Just to give some context, so it is about a young couple. They move into a new condo and begin experiencing strange phenomenon, cold spots, noises in the walls. And once they buy a new smart speaker, Itza, their strange occurrences start to center around Itza, their smart speaker. So in this passage, our two people, Vera and Thiago, are trying to figure out the source of what's going on. So they are trying to reach out to the real estate agent of the seller's real estate agent. So that's where we're jumping in, okay? So, calling the real estate agent was your idea, not our agent, but the seller's. We kind of knew who the seller was, but getting in contact with him was impossible. Our brownstone was one of a handful of properties this guy owned in Pilsen, and it was easy to spot his buildings because the exteriors were all painted the same beige color, with black trim and black vinyl window frames. The other properties housed businesses and were run by building managers who weren't about to offer up his name and direct phone number. The guy didn't show up for our closing, so even if we knew his name, we wouldn't know his face. We kept the paperwork from the closing in an empty UGG shoebox under our bed, and sitting cross-legged on the bedroom carpet, papers forming concentric circles around you. You found the real estate agent's name and agency. Still, I didn't think he would help. If we wanted to bitch about the property, he was probably going to tell us to talk to the inspector, not him. Then let him tell us no, you said. We're the ones stuck here, Thiago. We have to at least try. You put the phone on speaker and set it on the counter, and we both listened to it ring. He picked up and you introduced yourself, giving him our address and telling him we met at the condo closing. He sounded apprehensive. You asked if he could tell us anything about the history of the building before it was rehabbed. Did something happen here? Was there anything weird about the space? We stared at the phone, waiting for him to say something. Why do you ask? He finally said. The cold spots you had been walking through? It felt like one of them had passed through me as we stood there. My internal organs felt jumbled into the wrong spots. Because we've been experiencing things, you said. The mix of fear and adrenaline making the whites of your eyes pop. I know this sounds crazy. It's just, I'm sorry, ma'am, but any problems with appliances should have been brought up at the closing. No, you're not hearing me. His voice got far away, like he was shifting the phone off his shoulder to end the call. Please refer to the contract. You asked if that was the same contract requiring the seller to disclose any defects with the property to the buyer, like our water pipe leaking into the unit below us, and how the downstairs neighbor told us they had repeatedly asked the agent's client to fix it, but he never did. And maybe the agent didn't know about this pre-existing problem, but maybe he did. Excuse me? But you blurted something about fiduciary responsibility and small claims court, and that shut him up. We both looked at each other. Next thing he said was, "Hold on a sec." The sound of wind cutting across the receiver suddenly disappeared, followed by a sharp thump. "Sorry, just getting into my car." He took a deep breath. "Look, I can reach out to Mr. Groff and see if he knows anything, but I don't think he'll be much help. He isn't much of a hands-on guy when it comes to tenants." But I toured the building with him after that last unit cleared, the unit you purchased. An elderly woman had been living there for ages, and no one knew quite how long. She was very upset about being forced to move. I don't know whether she did this in retaliation or if this was how she was living, but the unit was filthy. There was garbage piled in the corners. The toilet and the tub were backed up. The smell was intolerable. The line went quiet. We looked at each other again. "Hello," you said? "Did we lose you?" "In the living room was a circle of melted candles," he said. "In the center of it was an animal carcass. You don't realize how hard it is to identify an animal without fur or skin." Your hands flew up to your mouth. "Oh my God." The agent kept talking. He said on the wall facing the carcass was a large rectangular shape drawn in blood. "What do you mean?" "Looked like a giant door," he said. "I don't know. I told Mr. Groff to call the police. This was obviously animal cruelty, but I think he just hired a couple guys to come in and clean it all up before the demo started. Are you still there?" Something in the living room caught my eye, a flash of movement. We both looked up and you extended your arm across my chest like we were about to rear-end a car. A wave of white light slid across Itza's surface. The hexagons glowed and then spun around, trying to locate our voices. Was she listening to us? Or had she been listening to us? It didn't matter. The hexagon spun another rotation and vanished. Whatever it was too late to do anything about it. So that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for reading that.
Yeah, no problem.
So I wanted to say a few things about just my experience with the book, because I was lucky enough to get an early copy, and it was in a time when I think I had a second draft of my own book due. I was editing. I just was very busy in the ways that one is busy. And so this copy comes through and I'm like, yeah, I'll read this. And I sat down and I read it through, and I said this, I've got the 2 dogs, the 2 cats, the 2 kids. I got a lot that needs to be attended to. And it became only about this book, which is, I love reading. I read all the time, but that's not necessarily the norm for me. And I was really just a huge fan from the start. So I read it through. I think I wrote back the next day and I was like, this is amazing. I love it. Wow. So I really, really liked it. And I wanted you to know that.
Thank you. Oh my God.
Yeah, of course. And then, one of the things I wanted to ask you right away, so when people get a chance to read this, I think the first pages are entirely about grief, right? This sense of loss that is occurring. And I'm really curious. It's gorgeous. I may ask you to read the first line of the book. It's a really good first line, but give me a second. So there's this whole thing about grief, and it's said at a funeral. I think I can say that. And I just was really curious. It took me a little while I knew what I was reading, but to really know that this was going to be partly horrific in a way that isn't just the normal human horrors we go through. And I love that about the book. So 2 things. Will you read the first line for everybody? And then second, did you always start at that funeral, and what made you do that rather than starting with what you just read with Itza?
Sure. All right. So the first line of the book. Okay, first line. Your parents wouldn't let me bury you in a tree pod. Mostly your mom. All right.
So good. So good, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the genesis of that was I did have the first line, but I kept trying to like bury it like further down into the story, and that it just would not work. That I was like, okay, this just has to be like the beginning. I want to say it's like the fourth draft where I decided like, okay, this is the start. And which then fed into the time jumping in the book, because we start with the funeral, but then the story then goes back to Vera and Thiago together, and then we get Itza and the haunting. So the whole idea of that time jumping was never really an idea for me. It wasn't until I couldn't avoid having that as like the beginning that I was like, okay, now how do I like go about this?
Well, it's really fun to read. Just as a reader, you're just into it. And then later as a writer, I'm like, where did we go from here? And the leaps in time are really interesting. And I think they're representative in a certain way of how grief hits you and the confusion of it. And certainly the confusion of potentially a haunted house or whatever you think is going on for a while. So I really like that. And I love that the first line to me, I have a messed up sense of humor, but I thought that was hilarious kind of. And then we delve into like, even the part about mostly your mother, like it was just very real and very funny. And then nothing, like none of what's actually happening is funny. Like it's very grim. And then you get into this other layer. So I love that you started there. So the time jumping happened naturally from the start?
Yeah, that was just a natural thing. That was just me kind of being like, okay, now like how do we started at the funeral, like how do I introduce this, how do I introduce Vera, who
Right.
she's dead in the beginning. How do I now, like, I think my biggest concern was that I would end up doing the Christopher Nolan thing where I have the dead wife as the inciting incident for this whole other story. So I was like, okay, how do I avoid doing that? So it really forced me to focus on making sure Vera was like this like real lived in character, which caused the time jumping to occur. So she can be a part of the book more.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you do absolutely do that. The other thing that happens though is that grief takes on its own life and its own character. And that's very clear in the book too. Like there's Vera, but there's also the version of her that is grief. And I thought that was done really well. The other thing I think I can say is that the mother, who's introduced basically in the first line, becomes something later, which I thought was really, really well done, because you kind of see her, I'll say this, you see her kind of in the funeral setting, and it feels like that person could go away, but then they turn out to be quite significant. So there's a number of twists and turns that are really great, I think.
Yeah, Diane was also a character I didn't know was going to take on such a big role. I think part of it was, I going into it, I thought it was like Thiago's going to have this singular journey. It's just going to be him because that's essentially what he wants. But the world keeps crowding in, and Diane is part of that world. But I just love Diane. Like for whatever reason, I think she just reminds me of like the women in my life, basically.
That's good.
Yeah,
she's very fierce. She's kind of like a mess, and she's also fierce. Like she does things that aren't expected, which I love. And she also does things that are expected. I expect her to see her falling apart. Like that makes sense. But then later, you're like, oh, okay.
Right, and I think touching back on the grief part, you make weird friends when it comes to grief. Like yes. You find yourself in these situations, having connections with people you never would have imagined you'd have connections with. So I think that's like another layer to the grief that I'm gonna say I meant to do.
You just need to claim it now.
Yeah, I'm gonna claim it. It's mine now.
Anything that was good that anyone interpreted, that was on purpose. 100%.
That was a literary tool that I created.
I wonder, because for me, like I ate up reading. I loved, like from a young age, I was going to be an author, and I would read horror, and then I'd read, whatever I thought I was supposed to read in terms of like Russian lit or whatever in between. And then I'd read some Stephen King and then I'd go back. So I always was attracted to it, but I didn't really know that's what I was interested in writing until really my editor was like, I would like to call this horror. What do you think? I wondered, at what point did you know you were writing horror or wanted to write literary horror? I mean, was that always the plan?
No, that was not the plan. I didn't know I would ever write horror, because I'm the biggest scaredy cat in the world. Like I'm terrified of everything. So I always assumed I couldn't write horror because people wouldn't think the stuff I thought was scary. But my fiction was just, I went like, I started off writing, I guess like Raymond Carver knockoffs, like type stories, but they would always keep veering into darker and darker territory. Like the writing was just going that way, until finally I decided like, okay, like, why don't I just like try to write like a short story that and like I had a particular story in my head that it was just like gnawing at me, but I didn't recognize like the familiar things I feel like when I feel like a story coming on, that I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna start writing this. Like this horror story was hitting me in a completely different way that I was trying to ignore. And finally I was like, okay, fine, I'm gonna write it. I wrote it, thought it was pretty good, submitted it, and it was published at a Pseudopod.
Yeah.
So that was like the first idea that like, oh, maybe this is what I've been looking for. I think when you're starting out in the beginning writing, I had this like, I was just all over the place. I wrote sci-fi, I wrote horror, I wrote literary, just writing a bunch of things. And I enjoy all of those genres, but I felt like I just needed, for my own sake, I kind of just needed something like a guidepost maybe, or, something to like create a lane for me. And I thought, well, maybe horror is that. So it was only when I started like writing the horror that I was like, oh, I really like this. There's a freedom in horror.
Yeah.
I like it. It almost feels like no one's paying attention to us. so like horror fans can like hang out with horror fans, and then we can all read our like cool horror. So it just feels like boundless. And that really what's attracted me to it.
That's fantastic.
Mhm.
So are there things, you're a scaredy cat, are there things you're watching or reading? What stories are you attracted to right now?
Oh yeah, I read and watch tons of horror. I've watched horror all my life. I just never realized that I like to be scared.
Well, yeah.
I always just assumed like, to be a horror fan, you have to like not be scared.
Oh, I see.
So I was just like, oh, I love horror, but I could never call myself a horror fan. It was oddly enough, Stephen Graham Jones,
Yes.
listening to him talk about his writing process, and how he can write so fast because he wants to get the story out of his head.
Yeah.
Because like he's like scared too. So I was like, oh, I think I can do this then. But like,
go ahead.
oh, the horror, like, I mean, to give you an idea of how much of a scaredy cat I am, I tried watching the Roanoke season of American Horror Story.
Yeah.
While my wife was out of town, and I was like, I got 2 episodes. I was like, I have to wait for her to get back. I can't do this.
I feel like I've improved tremendously. So to date myself, whenever The Ring came out, I think there was a solid 2 weeks where I could not remove myself from bed if I had to go to the bathroom. Like it was very like, and I still, do these things. But we watched *Malignant* the other night.
Oh.
Before it left, whatever.
Mhm.
And it was just one night. Like there was one night where it was difficult to function. And then I was okay.
And they were good.
Yeah, I got a little better.
Okay.
But it definitely is questionable. I mean, what do you think it is that makes people want to do that? To not, it's like, time to wake up, the sun's out, and I'm still sitting there like, I just one more second because I'm scared.
Yeah.
Why would you do that to yourself?
I think I know for me, I like watching and reading horror because there is some type of there is some type of like attrition that
Mhm.
I feel like is going on, like me going through the novel and getting to the end and having this experience,
Yeah.
that like I find really valuable, and it's kind of like a safe space where you can feel these feelings that, you know, in an immediate sense like are paralyzing, but like
Yeah.
you now have this like
That's true.
this space where you can experience that stuff and actually navigate it and not be so terrified. That's like my favorite part of horror, is that like, especially when you're like reading a story and then you start to see like the elements that like are, you know, ticking the boxes, that you know you're getting somewhere, and you're like, oh yes, I'm going to be so scared. Like that is my like number one favorite feeling of horror.
Do you have a particular trope you're attracted to? So like haunted houses were always the thing for me. It was like, I know as soon as we get into ghosts, I'm pretty convinced that my brain can make things appear. Not that I'm not sane, but if there's something out of my peripheral vision and I decide it's not right, I don't know
Mhm.
how to explain it, but I definitely like anything like that. Um, there's other things that won't get me, but that'll be paralyzing for a bit.
Okay. Yeah, I do. I think anything that that questions reality,
Yeah. Okay.
like you know, like anything to do with madness,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
like
similar.
freaks me out. And things like, you know, like the idea that you don't know yourself.
Mhm.
Something like, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is The Empty Man. I don't know if you've
Gosh, I
seen
don't
that.
even know that. No.
I love The Empty
I'm
Man.
gonna be
It like
traumatized by this. Okay.
recently came out, but it's and it fits that. It's like there's this entity called the Empty Man, and there's this detective trying to chase down this like story, but like the further he gets into it, um the things he accepted as like fact and reality just start to like fall apart. And I don't know why that
It
stuff
bothers
I
you.
really gravitate to. Yeah, like insanity for whatever reason. Like I'm like, ooh, that's alluring.
Well, this is kind of not, this is kind of a cheating question because I think I know you have this, but I want to know a little bit about music and its influence on what you're writing. I think you have a playlist. I think I read this somewhere,
Yeah.
maybe for this book. And I kind of had that when I was writing Tinfoil Butterfly, Jane's Addiction, and Rage Against the Machine, like things Emma, I thought would listen to. Is that something that always plays a role with you, or did you have to work at that for the book?
It depends. For this thing between us, I definitely needed a playlist, because so I mean the genesis of this book comes from me losing someone I like very, very close to me. So in that grief, I had developed a playlist that I was listening to.
Wow.
So when it was time to then write the book, I used that playlist to just get me back. Like every time I would just listen to it to get me back into that space, and then, you know, the pages would just bleed out of my fingers.
Was it hard to go back into that space? Like, did you just not want to sometimes?
Super hard. I mean, it's to be honest, every time like we talk about the book, like I kind of
Yeah,
have to like,
feel
a
it.
part of me and does go back there.
Yeah.
So like it is a little difficult, but like I mean it's not difficult in the sense that it's painful. It's just
Mhm.
more difficult in the sense of it's complex now.
Yeah, I bet.
So there are these like s- strange feelings now, because now it's a matter of like I have this book now, and that is like the outcome of all of this grief that I went through. So
Yeah.
it's like it's awesome, but in the one sense, it's like there's like a very real person tied to this book for me.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm.
What I want to go back though, and I want to know what's on the playlist.
Oh, so we've got the Cranberries. Cranberries are huge on there. There's a lot of I think like the XX, pretty much melancholy art, like R&B, like pop, like melancholy pop music is what I really gravitate to. I think Depeche Mode's on there. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, like any it's like me and like 14-year-old girls from the 90s, like our music, just like combines together.
I read the list and I was like, oh, I like Gus. I know I might have been friends with Gus. That's right. Yeah, it was very similar.
It's funny, like when I'm like listening to Pandora or Spotify and I'll get like a Sarah McLachlan song because of the music that I'm listening to. I'm like, all right, I get it.
I understand the stereotype I've stepped into. It's fine. Yeah, no, it's very familiar. I needed Emma to be in Tinfoil Butterfly to be very angry. And at first it was like, I think it had a long story, but like, I think it was hard to find a place for it because she was just a very angry woman. And I think I worked on her a lot before she was ready for other people. But that music really helped sustain that rage in a way that was helpful to me.
It's super helpful.
To Emma. So that was kind of cool. I liked seeing that you had a playlist for everybody.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So I want to know, like, when did you start this novel? How long has it been in your life? How long has it been around?
You know what? I think it took me like a year and a half to like get this novel into like enough shape for someone to read it. And then I think in total it was maybe like 3 to 4 years to completion. Yeah, like it took a while. I mean, you don't realize the time you're spending with a book.
Do you feel like, I mean, I know it's just, this is your it's coming out today, but do you feel in any way like it's like have you moved on to the next thing? Not that I'm asking about what the next thing is, but do you feel a little bit freed from it yet? Or is it still?
I do feel freed from it. I mean, I've read the book so many times that when I like read the pages, it looks like the Matrix. Like it's just like math that I'm reading. But yeah, like I've definitely like made my peace with it. I'm so happy for it to like now have its own life. Like I can't wait to see like what legs it has out in the world.
Well, it is a really fun experience if you can. I mean, sometimes it's a little much, but mostly it's really fun to have other people own it and like to have their own thing, whether they like it or not. It's like, well, this was so personal and so internal for so long that you know, it's just interesting to hear what other people think of something like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like it gives you a perspective like you couldn't have on your own.
No, not at all. And it's that thing we were joking about earlier. It was like people give you credit. Sometimes you're lucky and people give you credit for things you didn't mean to write. You're like, absolutely. Yeah, that is totally what that meant. That's
I mean, anything that people like pick up in the book, I meant to do.
You're just very brilliant as well.
Yeah.
I do think like, and I just want to make sure like to put out there that it is a book about, I mean, it is a horror novel. It is a book about grief, but it also has its moments of humor. It's very smart. It's very easy to fall into that world. Like I said, I just stayed with it once I started it with no problem at all. So it isn't, I mean, I did not find it to be heavy in a way. I found the pace to be quite good and to move very quickly. Did you have a lot? How do you write? Did you have a lot of things that you went back and trimmed? Are you someone? I'm someone who writes. I read a lot and then I have to go back and get rid of chunks. How does it work for you?
So I think a big piece of advice for me is something that Steven Spielberg once said, and I think it was when he was like trying to come up with Indiana Jones. And I think it was like him and George Lucas, they were talking and Steven Spielberg said like, what if we just made a movie that was just the good parts? So like that when I read that, it really, really hit home with me because there is a Vladimir Nabokov interview in the Paris Review where he was talking about Lolita and he's talking about the road trip section. And I'm gonna butcher like what the quote was, but he said something to the effect of like, yeah, like it's a little long, but like as long as the reader knows that the road trip's there, like they could probably like skip a few pages. And I was infuriated because that was where I stopped reading the book because I was like, I'm tired of Humber. Like I'm tired of his voice. Like I just he got me like so frustrated that I had to stop reading the book. So this Steven Spielberg quote really like knocked me out, that I was like, yeah, like why can't I write a book that's just the good parts? So that's really like a guiding principle for me, is to like, I like write the book as like as linear as I can get it, and then try to recognize like what are the good parts, and then try to see what information is outside of those good parts, and now how do I like, streamline it into the rest of the book, so like it's just like seamless.
Nice. Do you gravitate towards longer work? Like, is novel your natural habitat, or do you go back to short stories? Do you have?
I go back and forth. For the longest time it was just short stories, and then now I'm in like novel headspace.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
For whatever reason now, like in between novels, I will like write a short story. I think it like as like a palette cleanser or something. So I like that. I like this like the novel is like the big meal, and then a short story is this like a short story is not even like dessert. A short story is like a weekend romance or something, like where you're just like, it's all intense like as you're writing it, and then you have this like little thing.
Well, I think for short stories too, you can be like, I can be so in love with it. Like, even if it turns out it wasn't that good, I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever done. It's so good. And then later I might have a different experience with it, but you can really love it. A novel, for me, it takes a long time. And so it kind of go in and out of love with it. You're like, one day, this is the best thing ever. And then the next day you're like, this is horrible. Why would anybody read
100%. I mean, not even day by day. It could be like by night. I'm like, why did I write this? This is awful.
This is a horrid waste of time.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand that feeling. What do you think the best day job for a writer is?
Ooh, the best day job for a writer, I would say, is...
I'll tell you that some point when I was like probably 17, I attended, I don't think it's around anymore. I know it's not, the Antioch Writers Workshop. And I don't know who it was, but an older man gave me advice. He said, you don't want to be a teacher. That's a terrible job for a writer. You want to be like a plumber. You need to be an electrician. And I was like, whatever, dude, like, you don't know me. And then later I was like, oh my God, like that was probably the best advice I've ever gotten. And I just ignored it. I was like, no, you're wrong.
That's 100% true. You want like a job where it's like, you can get it as automated as possible. Or like, where you can like do that thing where you like drive home and you don't remember driving home, where you can work and not remember working, and then now you have this like space for you in your head for just writing.
Yes, I'm a teacher, so I do also teach and edit and stuff like that, which I adore, but then I tend to care about it a lot and I get really invested.
Yeah, I used to be a veterinary assistant, and that was probably like the hardest time for me writing wise, because like I was like actually invested in the job, like I loved it. So it would be hard then to like kind of like get myself going for writing when I've just gone through like 10 hours of like intense emotional experience. So yeah, like menial jobs for writers.
What is a good writing day look like for you?
Oh, a good writing day is like 6 a.m, big cup of coffee. I love writing in the morning. Writing in the morning is like my thing. And then I would like, my perfect writing day would be like writing in the morning for like 3 hours, playing with the dogs in the backyard, going to work out, and then like going back to writing, and then the evening to like, let's pretend I'll do something social, but more likely probably like watching TV.
You plan the social thing, and then when it gets canceled, you pretend you're upset it got canceled.
Yes.
That's what you do. You're like,
yes.
oh, darn it, it got
That's
canceled.
that is it. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
We're just dropping gems.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would want to go back and tell yourself? I was somebody in the 4th grade. I was like, I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a writer. Like, I wrote a really bad, probably a horror novel, in fact, in like 6th grade. It might've been fantastic. It was probably fantastic.
I assume it was.
It was. I didn't bother. It could have been even better, but I had other things to do. Were you somebody who always knew this was your calling, and did you have support for it?
I didn't know. I always wanted to be a film director.
Oh yeah.
From the jump, from like the first thing I ever wanted to do was be a film director. And it wasn't until I was in high school, I think maybe like my sophomore or junior year, I read Siddhartha by Herman Hesse. And that like everyone has that book, like that, it
Yeah,
was
that was
that
it.
book that completely changed everything for me. Because it was like, it was the movie in my head, but also like the thoughts and feelings that I didn't know I always had. So I was
Yeah.
like, I didn't know that the reading could be an experience like that.
Yeah.
So from that point on, I was like, nope, author, like that's what I want to do.
Yeah. And did you have other people around you? I'm just curious. I grew up in a very wonderful artistic community, and I don't think I took it for granted that everybody thought being an artist was a valid way to be. But you do get, as you get older and live in different places, you're like, okay, that wasn't the norm,
Mhm.
right? That was special, even if I didn't take it for granted. Did you have that kind of encouragement or that kind of peer group even?
I had like the freedom to just like, no one ever told me no for like when it came to writing. Um, and pretty much for whatever art I consumed, no one ever told me no. Like I was a 9-year-old kid watching George A. Romero's Night of the Living. 9 years old, my favorite two
No wonder you're
movies.
terrified.
Yeah, my two favorite movies as a 9-year-old were George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead and Pulp Fiction. So
Oh
like
gosh,
that
yeah.
was that was the kind of freedom that I had as a child. So like, yeah, when I would say I wanted to be a film director, no one ever said no. It was just like, oh, that's what Gus wants to be a film director. Okay. And when I decided I wanted to be a writer, everyone's like, all right, Gus wants to be a writer. There was never any like pushback or even some type of like stage mom type scenario. My mom was
Yeah.
like always supportive. My parents were super supportive. So like I was really lucky in that regard.
Me too. That's great. That's great. So you had these early introduction to horror movies that kind of made you want to be a director. That's great. And
Yeah.
the books as well. So
Yeah.
you were just surrounded by that stuff. Did you have art? Do you have artists in your family?
Yes, my older brother, Miguel, he's like big time graffiti artist. And then I have his daughter, Kayla. She's also like an amazing artist. I'm cousins with the rapper Nico Supremo. So like, there's like, I'm not even like the most famous person in my family.
You
I
will be.
still,
We'll
well,
plan
I
for
mean, I
it.
still have like ways to go before I can even reach them.
Oh,
So
that's
like,
great.
yeah.
Good. I love that. That's really nice. What do you want? What do you want people to know about your novel before they pick it up?
Well, I want them to know that it's the scariest thing that's ever been written, ever. Uh,
It does get kind of upsetting. I will give you that.
it gets upsetting. It's uncomfortable. It's disturbing, but it is also there. You mentioned it before. There is also like a sense of humor to it that's not like it's not like a I mean, it is kind of like a dark humor, but it's not at the expense of what's going on. It's more just like it's more the philosophy of Thiago as opposed to like jokes about like the situations. I think Thiago has a very laissez-faire personality, and I think like his humor is how he like deals
Yeah.
with these things. So like that's another like key part that people should know, is that like there is humor. It isn't this like slog of
It's
like
not. No, it's
pain and suffering. Like
not.
I set you up with like some nice jokes and some good feelings, and then the pain and suffering jump in.
Dips in and out. I think it does a really nice job of coming in and out of like the heaviness of it, right? This is just
Yeah.
like life. When you think you can't quite take anymore, then something changes and then you can go back into it again. It's
Yeah.
great. I think Thiago is really interesting too, because I think this is correct. He seems to keep trying to isolate himself, right? And there is, especially, I mean, I'll only speak as a woman. There's this idea, right, of gaslighting, of like people being around you that won't believe what you say, right? And that's certainly true for more than just women. but he kind of tries to do that. And one of the things I really admired about what you did is you wouldn't quite let him. Like we kind of, like you would give us Mom, you would give us Diane, people who recognize the situation. I love it when, especially horror writers, do that, right? So you're still not sure what's real and what's not real, but you have enough confirmation to fully invest. And I thought you did a beautiful job with that.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah, I think it was really important to to just not let Thiago be by himself, which is the thing he wants. Because I think ultimately he doesn't know what he wants. He's in pain. He's someone who's like suffering. So like it is the people around him who try to come to his aid, and though he doesn't realize it, like that's essentially what they're doing. And it's essentially what he is actually seeking out too, because we haven't even touched on the dog Brimley, who like comes into his life, and he's not looking for a dog. It's just this like happenstance thing that like has this profound effect on him, and that's ultimately what he's searching for, is like another some kind of connection. The connection he thinks he wants is with his grief, but what he really wants is just with life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then there's another confirmation of like what's real and what's not real involved with that, with the dog. That's
Brimley. Yeah.
He's great.
Yeah.
So good. I think we might have a couple of questions. I'm going to look.
Oh, cool.
See. Oh, and I should have asked this already. Is Itza inspired by any experience with your own device? So one of the things that's really great, I think also, which I kind of mentioned, but there are different points, right? It's a novel, you're reading it, and you're like, okay, it's a novel about grief. Okay, now it's a novel about haunted spaces. Now it's a novel about tech. So it really does have to do with Itza, which is a great name. I wonder how you came up with that. But where did that idea come from? I mean, I can kind of imagine, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
For spark. And I think the person's asking if you had that kind of creepy experience with any of those devices.
So I did have a creepy experience. Like I think it was something like just asking a random question, and my smart speaker responded, but then also continued talking, and I wasn't expecting that, and it just unnerved me. And then there are also experiences of the power going out, or not even the power, the internet going out, and then the internet popping back on, and our smart speaker just like loudly presenting itself. That really, yeah, it really stuck with me, and I was always interested in this idea of writing. It was started off as like a haunted house idea, but I wanted to use contemporary technology. I didn't want to ignore the internet. I didn't want to ignore smart speakers or any other kind of technology that we would have in a house. So that was really the genesis of the book, and it veered into what it ultimately became. With the name Itza, I was really trying to find a name that matched the whole reason Alexa is because like that Exa sound is like not very common. And I read that in an article that's why like Alexa is Alexa. So I was like, oh, I have to come up with a name that has like this sound in it that is not typically said, because you don't want it to like, you don't want your smart speaker to confuse it with whatever it is you're saying. So that's where Itza came up.
Nice. I didn't even know that. That's awesome. Do you still have these? Do you still have a device in your home?
Yeah.
Or did you quit using it?
I quit when I was writing it, I did not use the smart speaker, but now like time has passed, I definitely use it. I get lazy. I'm like Thiago. I just get lazy. So we currently use it for the weather, pretty much.
The weather. What is your relationship with technology in general? Have you decided it's just the way of the world and it's a trusting relationship until it isn't?
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty like, I don't know if I even have an opinion on technology. I just like go with the flow when it comes to technology. I don't keep up with the times. Every time I go to get my phone upgraded, the people in the store always like laugh at whatever phone it is I'm bringing, just because I hold on to my phone for so long. So like, but yeah, like I'm not someone who is like railing against technology, or I'm not someone who's like embracing it. I'm just like pretty much in the middle like everyone else.
Yeah, it's a pretty terrifying kind of depiction, and close enough. I think it's scary that it's a scary because it is close to reality. I mean, it's not too far off.
Yeah, and I think that's what was so what really hooked me about a haunted smart speaker. Just like one, because I was like, wait, how aren't there like 20 direct to video movies of like a haunted smart speaker? And then also it's just like, it just felt so real. It just felt like something that happens to everyone.
Well, it's also, I think you handled it well. I mean, you just put it right. You just went for it, because I think that writing now, whether it's horror or anything else, it is a challenge for the writer because of the ways we are always able to be in touch with each other in a way. Like Emma's in the 90s. So there isn't, she doesn't have to call home. There's no cell phone, right? And so you're always trying to figure out a way in or out of that. And you just you went for it and made it a part of the story. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, that was like my biggest concern, was like, especially, you know, putting a horror novel in contemporary times. Like, I think it's something you have to like contend with, because the reader is going to be like, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? So like, that was something I didn't want to avoid, especially because like, you're already talking about a smart speaker. Like, how do you not talk about their phones? Like, how do you not talk, like, how does Google not get mentioned if you're like not talking about this stuff? So it was really important for me to like touch on those things, so the reader didn't feel like I was kind of like doing shortcuts.
Well, and it's not like the world is any less terrifying now.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like the reality of it. So it's probably just the laziness of writers is trying to figure out how to handle it well, which hopefully will get better and better. But I liked that. I liked that. Did you know where the book was going to end?
Yes.
You had a vision, like how does your brain work? Do you know where you're starting and where you're ending, and you're just trying to get there? What's the hardest part? The middle?
You know, yes, for me, it's always, I mean, I would say it's the middle. Not so much like, I guess the way my brain works is I always get like the beginning, and I always get maybe like the climax, if I can get that. Like, I always get the beginning, I always get the climax, and then it's just a matter of like, okay, now where does everything else fit? And you know, I don't know if it's the same for you. Like, once I start getting a story going, it's like a ball of gum. And like, if anything I'm exposed to, like, if I like it, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna use that. Like, someone said something, I'm like, oh yeah, and I just like put it into my phone, like, to use later. Or like, I read something, I'm like, oh, like, that was like a clever way of doing that, I'm going to like try to do that. Like, it just becomes this like ball of like everything you're consuming in that time. So like, by the end of it, I'm like, yeah, like I don't know where all this came from, but I totally meant to do it.
Yes, again, it was all on purpose. We have somebody who wants to know if you've ever seen a ghost.
Oh, have I ever seen a ghost? That is a tough question.
I always want to say yes. I want to be like, absolutely.
I mean, I've definitely experienced things that I thought were like ghost related, but like have I seen a like Ghostbusters ghost? No,
Oh, that'd be fun though.
I know
Those
that would be
great.
I don't know if that would be fun, but that would definitely be cool.
It'd be cool. It'd
Yeah.
be cool. What kind of experiences have you had experiences where you thought that you maybe don't know everything about what's going on? Disconcerting experiences, maybe?
100%.
Yeah.
My like the house I grew up in Bridgeport, was for sure had something going on. The longer we stayed there, the more experiences we were having. Like, there was one morning where I'd woken up with this gigantic welt on my chest, and it was in the shape of a hand. And, you know, didn't know where it came from, didn't know what what caused it. But then there were other instances where I was hanging out in the basement and I heard like distinct voices in my head. My brother, who was also like visiting at the time, he actually saw like a ghost, and not even in our house, but like outside of the house. So like so many strange occurrences is in that house that like definitely fed into what I ended up using like in the book, that just the whole like terror of not knowing what it is you're dealing with, and like just random things constantly happening. That played a huge role in this writing.
Yeah, I think that I don't think that I've ever seen a ghost, but I do think I'm often inspired. So Tinfoil Butterfly started because I went to the Badlands and I went to the Black Hills, and going to places where you are so hyper aware that people have come before you and that they have had a different experience with the land, maybe something very meaningful, maybe an atrocity, whatever it is, but that a place has a history. And so for me, it's very easy to imagine that history might be strong enough to have a life of some sort again. And I'm always very interested in that. It often generates, the one I'm working on now, the book I'm working on now is based on an island in Lake Erie that seems very haunted to me. So there's like kind of places that inspire that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it always feels like an echo of something.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And I'm always trying to figure out like who in my mind could have created this echo, and where from my perspective could I tell that story.
Right. And then I think that's what's so great about stories that do that. I think my favorite part is like when you can't tell, like, the haunting feels like an echo, but then there's always an element that has like detached from the echo part and is just like operating on its own. That just is so terrifying.
What's the last movie you've seen that was really terrifying, that had the biggest?
The last movie I saw that was really terrifying.
Anything I'm watching in which I'm not, I mean, this is like whenever you watch something and you're just not sure what they're going to do next. I mean, that can hit a lot of genres, but you're uncomfortable.
For sure, that was The Empty Man.
Empty Man, I'm all over this.
But the last horror movie I saw was a couple days ago. I finally watched Pumpkinhead. I don't know if you've seen that. Just because it's
so good. Come on.
I mean, yeah. It was good. I liked it, but I think I was like the Amazon reviews like overhyped me.
Oh yes.
So like I went in and I was like, oh, this is good. It's like one of those movies where like it's just been ripped off so much.
Yeah, you've seen it
like
already.
Yeah, it's like the text, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, so this is where all of those things came from.
It's so easy. I don't like rom-coms. I have a very low tolerance for, but for whatever reason, like Children of the Corn, like that is like just to me just a riot. Like it's hysterically bad and I just adore it. There's a student recently introduced me to like a 70s film that I think you can really only watch on YouTube. I have not watched the whole thing, but I think it's called The Bed That Eats, and it's a bed and it eats people, which is pretty like there's a drumstick at one point that the bed consumes. It's super fantastic.
Oh, this is right up my alley. All right.
Yeah, right. I mean, you just have to watch a little bit. Don't invest a whole bunch of time, but it's fantastic. Ginger Snaps, which is like a Canadian werewolf film. The main character's name is Ginger. She gets bitten, she snaps, she's a disaster for a long period of time after that. Wow. So good. That one might actually be good, although they did do like a follow-up with Victorian Dress, which is kind of an indication that it wasn't good, but that's all right. Do you have things like that? Do you have like really bad like B movies that you really love?
John Carpenter's bad movies are like my favorite movies. Like I made my sister-in-law, I forced her pretty much to, I was like, oh, let's watch a horror movie. And I like hyped her up and I put on Vampires by John Carpenter, like one of his bombs. But like, I think I like I don't know what it like. First of all, John Carpenter is like the
Yeah,
ultimate that I
absolutely.
worship.
Yeah.
I just love, all of his movies are like, there's this like horrible thing that no one knows what it's about, and go. Like, and don't ask questions about it. Just go.
Is she
Oh, it
gonna
killed.
watch another movie with you, or is she done now? Is she like, well, that was terrible?
I mean, I can force her to watch another one.
Oh,
I'm
well,
pretty
all
sure.
right. I feel bad for her.
It'll be a good one this time.
Okay, you can alternate so
Yeah.
that she has faith in you again, and then you can crush her.
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
was thinking about The Thing next time.
Oh, so good.
Like one
So
of my
good.
favorite movies.
I keep trying to figure out movies. So I have a 10 and a 12-year-old. The 12-year-old wants to be right now a director when she grows up. She's kind of, because of my problems, she kind of wants to watch horror movies. So I keep trying to, I haven't let her watch George Romero yet because I'm trying to be a decent parent.
Yeah.
We are trying to find the things, and it's kind of fun to, like, of course, Psycho. There's some Hitchcock ones that are totally worth watching.
A movie. So I have a 9-year-old niece,
Okay.
and I recently saw Old with her.
Oh, I wondered. I haven't watched it yet.
So I mean, I
know
I thought it was okay, but like I was really like blown away by her like critique of it. She was like, she was like, I didn't like it. It was bad. But then she was like, it would have been a better ending if just like everyone died. and then it just went to black.
Always a better ending.
Yeah, and I was like, wow, you're ready for like big time scary movies now. Like I told my brother, I was like, I think she's ready for Scream. I think she's ready for. Well, I was like, we need to go. We need to get the ball rolling.
Bring it. That'd be great. It is fun to watch with them some of these things because they do have a good critique of it. It's also joyful because we watched The Sixth Sense, and of course at this point, I've seen it. I know all the lines. I know exactly what they're going to do. I know when Bruce Willis is going to have the flashback to explain everything to us. But for her, it was a new experience. And you could see again why it was so big when it happened.
Yeah.
Same with Blair Witch. It was like, okay, I get it. I can see it happening again.
Everyone else does the whole recording their kids when like Luke Skywalker learns Darth Vader's his father. And like horror people do like horrific reveals to their children. They're like, yeah, he was dead all along.
Jaws was a good one. That wasn't too bad. I think I have a real question here, so I'll stop geeking out. Do you have any advice for someone who has never read a horror novel before? Do you just put the book down when you get scared? They're also very excited to read your book. It's a very good book. And there's definitely times when you'll get, I'm thinking of like a cabin scene. There's some scary stuff, but you could take a break. What would you say?
I just got terrified right now.
Thinking about it? Yes.
There was, okay, now, are we like in a horror movie right now? There was someone who just like peeked through your blinds.
Oh, that was probably a child.
Okay. It was terrifying.
I'm sorry. They're lurking. I've had like an hour to myself, and it's too long.
Oh, it's too long.
They're approaching.
Yeah, I feel it.
So what would you give advice to somebody who doesn't usually read horror? I mean, for me, I would say, gosh, it would be such a disappointment to decide that you're not somebody who reads horror and not get to read your book, because it does say so much about relationships, the primary one, about grief, about technology, about how we get through horrible things and how we're different or better or worse. So it would be a shame to decide you don't read horror. So what's your advice?
100%. You lose like a huge swath of like great literature. I would say read during the day and stop when it's scary. That's pretty. And then always have a palate cleanser. Like,
I think
just
that's
something,
right.
watch some dumb YouTube clip, or like just clear yourself out. Like that's right. That's what I can do.
If you watch something really sad, or if you watch, you want to adjust. You don't want to go to sleep on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great advice. That's awesome. Is there anything else you'd want people to know?
Just that I hope they enjoy the book. And I wrote this book for a lot of people. I wrote it for people to be scared and for people to enjoy it. But I also wrote it as a kind of a companion piece for someone who's going through a difficult loss. I've in my head, it was always the idea that like someone who's grieving or suffered a great loss, like I wanted this to be the book that someone's like, hey, like I know this sounds weird, but there's this horror novel that I think you should read. Like just to, I don't think that the book doesn't have answers, like that's for sure. The book does not have answers when it comes to grief, but I really wanted to focus just what it feels like to be grieving. And for people who haven't suffered a great loss, I wanted the book to be their great loss. Like I wanted the book to be as devastating as the ending to Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist, something that just like punches you in the gut, and then like you kind of need some time to recover afterwards. That was always my intention, and I hope that's the outcome for the reader.
Well, I'm just really excited about it. I've been telling people since I first was privileged to get an early copy, just like that this is a really good book. And I bought a couple from Unabridged myself. They're on their way to me. They may be in the mailbox right now. But it's a really wonderful book. And I'm so excited to have some time with you and to get to read it and be a part of this night. Congratulations. And I can't wait to read more stuff from you. Gus has a story out in the Southwest Review right now that's worth checking out.
So does Rachel.
Watch. Yes, we're both in there. So
both
like
in it. So
absolutely important document. But yeah, so it's great. I'm so glad to have this
awesome
time.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Like this was a blast. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And Unabridged.
Yes. There. I think he's coming. There he is.
I'm coming back in. I wanted to thank the two of you guys for being with us tonight. Gus, congratulations and happy pub day. It's been great to hear about this thing between us tonight, and we're so excited that we get to share it with the world now. So thank you both for being here. Rachel, thank you for hosting such a great conversation. To everybody else that's in the audience, we've got copies available in the shop now. So that link that you were sent with your invite has a place where you can order the books. We've got them. Come get them. Thank you both for being here, and thank you everybody else. Have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye everyone.